Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Brian E. Roach and Zach Metkler.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast, brought to you by Antonio Brown, because strangely enough, the season's over, and we got a lot to talk about, and a lot of it is thanks to Antonio Brown. So this podcast is sponsored by one AB, Antonio Brown. My name, if you haven't figured it out yet, is Brian E. Roach, the host who does not like toast, and a variety of other things. But the host who does like toast is unavailable today because he is just hanging out and trying to ignore all of this wonderful news that we're getting and finding it difficult. So, to help me out as we examine the world as it is today in Pittsburgh Steelerdom, in Steelers Nation, welcoming back aboard Zach Metkler, the professor of football, Zachariah. How are you today, sir?
You know, Brian, I thought whenever the new year came in, this would be a chance for everybody to start fresh, start new. All the nonsense we've witnessed over the last year or so with all the drama with Le'Veon Bell, the disappointment not making the playoffs, I thought, maybe the optimist in me would come out and see that we had an opportunity to kind of move forward. But evidently, things aren't like that. And in the real world, New Year's is just a made-up construct, and life continues as it was. So here we are, more drama.
Well, maybe that's what it is, a fresh start of. It's a fresh start of drama. It's the fresh drama instead of that old stale 26 drama that we don't even need to talk about, because compared to this drama, the 26 drama is passé. It's boring. It's blah. So now we got all new drama, and that drama centers around one number 84 Antonio Brown, and there was let's put it this way: there has been an inordinate amount of speculation. There has been a lot of stuff reported. There has been some stuff that is confirmed. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of all this with not somebody that I like to give credence to because he's a moron, even though he considers himself the smartest guy in the world. That's Mark Madden. Tweeting out that AB is a cancer and a horrible person and blah, blah, blah. And when it initially comes from there, you kind of go, don't believe that. Don't buy it. But since that initial tweet, my goodness, how things have changed, how the landslide has come down, and we have just been inundated with a continuing escalation of AB information. So let's see if we can kind of piece this timeline together a little bit. Starting off with, maybe he hurt his knee. And, really, I think one of the bones of contention that has been discussed heavily here is, let's start with that. He gets a day off on the injury report last week before the Bengals game and is listed as coach's decision. It's not listed as a knee injury. It's listed as coach's decision. And that would be, I think, Wednesday, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So the team voting for MVP, I don't think took place until Thursday, because there's been speculation that the reason that AB didn't practice Wednesday wasn't because of a knee injury. It's because he was sulking and pouting because he did not win the MVP award. But that wasn't voted for until Thursday, correct?
As far as I know.
As far as I know. And so I think we can discount that. Now, while I don't know certain things we don't know. For example, there's been reports that there was some kind of an altercation at practice where AB threw something at somebody, and that somebody has been rumored to be Ben Roethlisberger. Ben on his radio show said, I don't know anything about that. I didn't see any such thing. Totally downplayed it, said it didn't happen, which even if it did, that's what he's going to say, I think, in this case. And AB basically was like, that's it, I'm not going to practice. And so then he didn't practice on Thursday, and the complaint was that his knee was sore. And so he didn't practice Friday, and Mike Tomlin had said, go get an MRI. He said, I'm going to go get an MRI, but he never actually did go get an MRI. Then Drew Rosenhaus, or whatever his name is, calls the Steelers, says, oh, yeah, AB's good to go. And Mike Tomlin said, that's not how we play here. You know, you don't just get to say, I'm ready, and I go, okay, thank you very much, sir. You can go ahead and play. Thank you. You have to participate. You have to be a part of the team. So AB was not allowed to play in the game on Sunday. And according to Tomlin, he said to AB that AB came to him and said, I'm ready to go. And Tomlin said, no, you're not going to go. Instead, the best thing you can do for us is to support the team and be on the sidelines. And then he left at halftime, allegedly. Tomlin said he can't confirm or deny that he left at halftime because he was focused on the game. But I didn't see him anymore, and I was at the game. Not that I have X-ray vision and can see everywhere at all times, but AB's not, a wallflower. He's fairly easy to find. And I did not see him in the second half anywhere. It's been reported by a lot of different national media that multiple players have said he left. And basically claiming that he quit on his team. Now, it has come out, I saw a report today from someone who said AB quit on his team because he felt other members of his team were not taking the season as seriously as he was, and therefore he decided to not play. That's irrational logic if that's in fact the case, and I don't know how much credence I lead to that, but that was some other national NFL guy who posted that. And that leads us to sort of where we are now, where now it's been, AB wants a trade, AB's miserable, he's tweeting a bromance with George Kittle from the 49ers, he's no longer following the Steelers on Instagram, blah, 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 on and on and on. Boy, welcome to 2019.
The way I see it, it's a lot, and I want to start off. I know a lot of Steelers fans will not give the credit to where I think it needs to be, but I do give some level of credit to Tomlin for how he handled the press conference. I listened to it live. That way, the emotions could still be cut fresh and raw. I thought he handled it about as well as he could, because in my mind, there's a lot of other things that could have been talked about. The results of the season. The fact that there's 4 different teams that are trying to poach away arguably the best and most appreciated coach on the staff, Mike Munchak. The fact that free agency is getting ready to come. The fact that they have a nice draft position based on their failures this season. But to surprise of nobody, 95% of the questions turned into, let's braid Mike Tomlin about Antonio Brown and all the things that came about. I think he handled it well. But with that being said, I don't know what to believe when it comes in the grand scheme of what's been heard, because until the dust settles on this, and I think it might be months until we really kind of get the full picture of what actually took place, I'm willing to believe what is being told to us, because Antonio Brown, until he comes out and says something, which I would be surprised if he ever did, all we have to go and fall back on is the report that's been put out by Mike Tomlin when he gave his play-by-play, which almost seemed as if it was I'm tired of dealing with this type of scenario, so here's what it is. And there's only 2 ways that you can look at it. Either Mike Tomlin's being 110% honest, or he's being untruthful, lying through his teeth, trying to kind of protect himself and the organization from some catastrophic blow-up that apparently happened. Then, you have the mixed-in remarks from Ben from what he saw. There's a lot of moving pieces with it, and, all we really have confirmed that we have no other choice but to kind of go off of, that's not from some anonymous sources from the horse's mouth, Mike Tomlin, is what you pretty much just walked us through. And for the time being, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, we've got people coming down on all sides of this thing, right? It's AB's fault. It's Tomlin's fault. It's Ben's fault. It's Art Rooney II's fault. It's that's my
favorite one.
It's everyone's fault. And look, there's certain facts of life that I think people need to understand, and it just is what it is. Quarterbacks are going to get a lot more leeway in the NFL than any other position because they're the hardest to find, and they are arguably the most single important position on the team. So, is Ben a bit of a diva? Yes, and you and I talked about this earlier, and we've talked about it in the back rooms, and you put it very well, I thought. So I'm going to let you allow that eloquence to come out and talk about why maybe Ben is a diva, but it's not the same.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of players in the NFL that are divas, and traditionally, for whatever reason, the divas are the playmakers. I mean, you rarely ever see divas unless it's like a Richie Incognito situation where it's the complete opposite of being a diva, and it's almost just being an over-the-top brute bully. Typically, like the nitty-gritty positions like linemen, fullbacks, sometimes linebackers, you don't see the diva personalities nearly as much with them. They might be more outspoken, but they're not divas. When you see guys like quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, cornerbacks, they're the ones that you always see, no matter what's going on in the game. You can point to any team and point out a guy, but how many guys can actually point out the linemen? It's because the skilled players are the ones that are getting their names there. Whenever you watch a Steelers game, you see Ben Roethlisberger, you see Antonio Brown, and you see Juju Smith-Schuster. They're the ones that are in the faces. So they have this mentality that they're the ones that are making the plays, and they're the ones that are doing it. And a lot of times it gets forgotten that there is a team full of 10 other players on one side of the ball you're dealing with. And when I look at a guy like Ben, he is a diva, and he's been routinely a diva. And, I think he had a lot bigger issues whenever he first came into the league. I think the fame and the attention of being a rookie quarterback and, starting the season out 13-0 in your starts and going 15-1, taking the team to 15-1 and going to the AFC Championship game, winning a Super Bowl in year 2, that has, no matter who you are, there is some level of ego-ness and cockiness that'll come from that. But the difference with Ben, who has gotten better throughout his career, and you can make the argument that he calls out his players, which personally I've never had a huge problem with. The guy's a 15-year vet. He's a future Hall of Famer, and most of the time when he's called out these guys in public, I think, one, they get twisted a little bit. I think a lot of times we don't listen to the full sound bit, and a lot of times the people that are doing the interviews with him are coaxing him into those questions. But those guys typically respond well. I look at James Washington this year. He kind of really turned it on after Ben kind of aired him out, and then he got benched for a week, and then, he made some very crucial catches down the stretch. You see a guy like, Martavis Bryant, who Ben caught out on numerous occasions. I forget the one stat line. It was like 9 catches for 154 yards or something along those lines after Ben publicly called him out. If that's what it takes to call guys out and get them to produce at a high level, I mean, call everybody out. But, he has those moments where he's a diva, but you never hear circumstances of Ben going AWOL. And because he's a quarterback and because can be a diva, and, he kind of stirs the pot and he makes these kind of vague questions, we still look at him that way. But the difference between a situation like that where he's a diva is, one, he's a quarterback. Like you said, and like I've said before, quarterbacks have a different set of rules. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's just the way it is at any level. They get looked at differently because it's so hard to find that guy. Once you have a hold of that guy, unless he's murdering if he's murdering a person's family or, sexual assailant, which, again, different story. There's no reason to move on from that guy because he's outspoken. I mean, you can look at Aaron Rodgers, he's outspoken, but Tom Brady, we've seen the flare-ups he's had where he's kind of been, prima donna with some things. Ben has that personality and that side to him. The way that I look at it, though, compared to a guy like Antonio Brown, yeah, Antonio Brown has that kind of diva mentality. He is a superstar player. He's arguably one of the top 5 players, regardless of position in the league, over the last 6 years. So I think realistically, you see a guy like him, he has these outbursts, but then you hear about him potentially going AWOL. That's the difference in my mind when it comes to how you can still be a diva and be a good teammate. Ben, I think, does that. He's a diva. He can come in, though, and still he's a good teammate. He's at the meetings. He's leading, even though it might not be the way people conventionally want it to be a leader. He's not afraid to point the finger at him, and he doesn't ever seem like it's me, 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 me. You don't always get that feeling from Antonio Brown. The fact that there's 3 potential instances this season of him going AWOL, dating all the way back to training camp, which I remember being at training camp. He wasn't there, and hearing people chit-chat in the stands, wondering, where's AB? Why isn't he here? And there was the report of an injury, but he's gone. You don't know where he is, and there's really nothing ever came of it except, he had a little temper tantrum with some of the media when he was questioned about his absence. And there's other moments where, the team feels like they're losing him. Whether or not, he actually did quit on the team mentally, physically, his presence, or people are just assuming that the way that you present yourself speaks volumes more than just what you also say as well. So if you're not showing up to stuff, and you think that there was multiple reports of players saying they thought he was faking this knee injury, based on what he had reported to Mike Tomlin, that's where you start seeing the divide. There's plenty of divas in the NFL that can be great teammates for guys, but just have that, I want to do well type of mentality. They stir the pot a little bit more, but the right reasons are there for it. Then there's guys like AB that I sometimes wonder, is it actually there? Is the right motive behind it all there? Or is it just the me first and then kind of going AWOL and letting that diva personality kind of take away and run away with it?
And to be fair to Antonio Brown in this sense, Antonio Brown is, as you said, he's one of the top 5 players in the league, period. His work ethic is second to none. He does everything he has to do to be the best at his craft. But that does not necessarily mean you're a benefit to the team in the big picture, right?
Those could be true.
Yeah, it's in theory the team is always going to be better with a player like that on it, but theory isn't always the case. There's always edge cases where the fact is, once that mentality change and starts to metamorphosize into a more less of a team focus and more of a me focus, as you're saying, that's just detrimental. Now, I think a lot of Antonio Brown's personality, and you've said this as well, comes from the fact that, this is a guy who literally made himself, from sleeping in cars to going to college at a lower level school, being a 6th round draft pick. He's always had that chip on his shoulder that he's been overlooked, he's been wronged, and it's fueled him. And I think what happens though, when you look back at Antonio Brown, rookie, first 2, 3, 4 years, you have you still have that, edge to him, right? I'm the great, I'm going to be, I just do what I do. But there was also a humbleness. When Ben would come over and talk to him, he would look at him and react. It would be like, okay, yeah, I got you. Because he was more open to things. But what happens is, for now, how many years everybody's been telling Antonio Brown that his doo-doo don't stink, and he's the number one receiver in the league. There's nobody better than him. He's the one that stirs the pot. Without him, the team is nothing. All these things have been put in his head now for multiple years. And that, I think that kind of feedback for these guys who live a different reality anyway than most of us do, because they've been told that they're great and they've been told and been able to get away with things that none of the rest of us could ever get away with. So they live in a different reality. But when you're constantly getting that feedback, it cannot help but change your own outlook. And you start to believe, they talk about believe your own press. His press is good, and his press is probably right. But yeah, he's now starting to believe that press, or that's the way this appears, in saying they can't do without me. And I'm not happy for a variety of reasons. I didn't get my catches that I wanted to get this year. I didn't lead the league in yardage or in number of catches. Yes, I had 1,000 yards, but Juju had more. Yes, I had 15 touchdowns, and that was great, but I wanted more. I wanted to be in that conversation for MVP of the league again like I was last year. I want all these things to be about me, and that's the problem. I said this, I've tried to keep my mouth shut in the back room a little bit and let everybody play out, because we got, even in the back at SCU, we have team AB and we have team whoever else you want to pick, right? Where they're, AB, you can't let go of AB. AB is great, AB's this, and other ones that are ready to dump him out the door because of all of this. And the thing is, I've met him a couple times, and I've also heard a lot of people talk who have met Antonio Brown. And I'm not trying to pretend I have inside sources the way, somebody like Aditi does, or any of the national writers or any of the beat writers. I don't. but I still have a view based on the limited interactions I had and the information that I've heard. And, it's not surprising to me that this is where we find ourselves because, the focus is different. Antonio Brown's face is much more alight. He's much more involved. He's much more attuned to what's going on when the focus is Antonio Brown. When the focus is the Steelers, he's still there, but it's not the same. It's not, you don't see that glint in his eye. You don't see that twinkle. You don't see that smile the same way. It's only when the focus is AB. And so I've been wondering for a while, and you've had people say things, and you have said, many times, there's more to this story. There's stuff because the Steelers do a good job of keeping their drama internal for the most part, and nobody's going to believe that, considering all the drama that's been going on. But they keep most of this stuff inside the locker room. Yep. The problem is, at some point, it starts to spill out because these personalities start to spill over, and it started last year. Or the year before, whenever that Facebook Live thing happened, and even prior to that. I mean, there are now reports that this is part of why he wasn't at a big school, and it's more than just the fact that he was a small school guy, that teams did their homework, and they knew that he was a me-first guy. I don't know that that's all 100% true, because I think you cannot discount what Antonio Brown did for the team, but you also cannot overstate the fact that the team hasn't won anything with Antonio Brown. So, and he's done great, and he's been happy, and he's been on the cover of Madden, and he's done all these things, but they haven't won anything yet with him. You would kind of think that would gnaw at him, but sometimes I think it does, sometimes I think it doesn't. Anyway, so Ryan Clark, ex-Steeler, made his will known, and I'm not going to get into the whole part of it, but he said once you pay AB, you're going to create a monster because that's what's going to happen. And I won't say that is immediately the case, but it sure does kind of feel like when AB got the big contract, that's when the focus started to change and become more me-centered, and his brand and all the little catchphrases and all that stuff, which we all thought was cute and great and fantastic, until it starts to get to where we are now.
Yeah, and kind of echoing the Ryan Clark interview with Scott Van Pelt, Greg Jennings, I don't know if the viewers were able to get a chance to see that, was on with Colin Cowherd a couple of days ago, kind of when this was all transpiring. And, Greg Jennings for years was one of the more respected players in the league, very well spoken with his ideology and how he believes with things that go on in the NFL. And also as being a receiver that was with a personality like Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. I think his insight's kind of better than most. And he had a quote that's kind of stuck with me about this entire process, which then when I reflect upon my time playing football, I can kind of understand where he's coming from. You kind of can see sometimes the guys that kind of have that, I don't even call it that kind of personality trait. Like something just seems like, they might be the guy that can kind of show off in the wrong manners. And he kind of gave a story about his time whenever he was at the rookie symposium, and he came in with Brandon Marshall, and Brandon Marshall shows up kind of for their first meeting wearing a pair of tight pants, no shirt, and like this weird kind of over the top hat. And instantly, everyone kind of looked at him with this kind of weird glaze, and kind of looking at him, saying, what is this? And there was reports that Brandon Marshall's early on in his career where he kind of had some issues feuding with the teams, coaches, other players, until he kind of something clicked in his head, and Brandon Marshall became kind of a more sought after commodity in the NFL for being a team player. I think that again, I'm not going to pretend like I know because I wasn't involved in the recruiting process out of college for Antonio Brown. I wasn't involved in the scouting process with NFL organizations when he was coming into the league. There very well could have been something that maybe there was a warning sign. And, a lot of people have given a lot of crap to Ryan Clark. I tend to respect him. I know some people, especially Pittsburgh people, kind of think he has a way of being unfair. I compared it the other day to to some of the people at SCU. I compare him to the dad who's the head coach of a football team who his son happens to be the quarterback. And he always is harder on that quarterback than he is the other players because he wants the quarterback to be the best player he can be. I think Ryan Clark has a tendency to be a little bit harder and maybe kind of come down with a more unbiased look because he's been in the Steelers locker room. He spent 8 of his 13 years in the NFL with Pittsburgh. And he is trying to be as unbiased as he can. And that's why I kind of tend to respect his aspect on the entire thing. And I think his perspective as a former guy in that locker room, one, I don't think violates locker room code because A, he's no longer in there. And two, if you want to criticize Ryan Clark for giving a very vague, if you're being completely honest, story about his perspective on a player, which is his job as an analyst, and then not look at the fact that you had the Facebook Live incident with Antonio Brown 2 years ago, that's the pot calling the kettle black as far as I'm concerned, because those both can be looked at as violations of locker room conduct, AB is being kind of more because that's happening in that sacred moment where you just beat the Chiefs, you're going on to play the Patriots in the AFC Championship game for all the marbles to get to the big dance. In my mind, that's a bigger issue. So I appreciated Ryan Clark's aspect, and like you kind of alluded to, there's a lot of things that happen within an organization that you never hear about. It might be years after the fact you hear about this stuff. And I think realistically, that's kind of the way the Steelers do it. For as much drama as that comes out about Pittsburgh, there is plenty more that we never see because of the fact that they take care of it in-house. And I think a big reason as to why we're getting this stuff now, it's after an emotional, season where the Steelers missed out on an opportunity to make it to the playoffs where really the doors were wide open, because I think any of the 12 teams that are currently in the playoffs have a chance of going all the way. And I think because of that, we're looking at these opportunities to kind of point fingers and see what's going on. And then you hear this story about Antonio Brown and the fact that the Steelers didn't make the playoffs. It's magnified tenfold to the point where you're looking at it from this perspective of, well, maybe this is why, they came out so slowly. Maybe these things have been going on. And as this snowball starts going and you start picking up steam and you hear these people start crawling out of the woodworks that never had a reason to say something, they're like, well, yeah, I saw this happen a couple of years ago. We were doing such and such. And I think that's really all Ryan Clark was getting at. And I think it's a good perspective because maybe Ryan Clark was being a little bit too judgmental. He had already made his money at that point. He was a Pro Bowl safety at that point. Maybe he kind of just saw the fact that this was a young kid who had an opportunity to make a big name for himself. And again, you said it earlier, not taking away anything from Antonio Brown's work ethic because he's a tremendous worker. He had a chip on his shoulder, and I love those guys. And if he was a quarterback, he's the guy that you want because he's going to put out all the doubters. I think realistically, maybe the money did get to his head, maybe it didn't. But I've been saying that I think the writing might have been on the wall in front of our faces for longer than we would have expected with some of the instances, dating back to some flare-ups he had. There was the kind of mini holdouts, not really holdouts, where, he came to work, but, you could tell he was displeased with him not getting a new contract as quickly as he wanted it. We're not at practice all the time, and the reporters aren't at practice all the time, and I'm sure there might have been instances that would have happened at that point, kind of like what Ryan Clark alluded to. And you see instances where, like I said before, he at training camp this year, he went AWOL for a period of time due to an injury that kind of went undisclosed, and we kind of pushed it to the side. There was the instance where he had that issue with Ed Bouchette earlier in the year. He had the issue with the former PR individual for the Steelers. There was the moment where he had that massive meltdown on the sidelines with Randy Fiechner. There was the issues with throwing furniture over the 14th floor balcony. There was the McKnight Row at 100 miles per hour issue. There was him being called out by Ben. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And at what point do we start looking at these just isolated instances and maybe a sum of a bigger issue that's going on here that we might not have even known was going on because we see the Antonio Brown that we all fell in love with. And we don't want to see a guy like that have any type of flaws. And maybe there's some issues going on that we just weren't aware of or we just chose not to be aware of that have been sitting right in front of us for the last however many years.
Yeah, and people, one of the things that people like to get on Mike Tomlin about is discipline and about how he allows these personalities to come out and all this and how they get preferential treatment. And Mike Tomlin has been very upfront in saying that at times it depends on who you are as to how you get treated. I treat you the way that your play earns you the right to be treated. So yeah, some of the star athletes get preferential treatment, and you let certain things slide because they are who they are. But he also said very clearly in his Tuesday press conference, there comes a point in time where that is no longer acceptable, where you've now become more of a problem than you're worth. And the question is, are we here? Is that the place we find ourselves right now? And we're going to, after we answer this little question, we're going to look at some scenarios what maybe the Steelers can maybe do with him, maybe not do with him. But in your mind, in your heart, do you think we're at that point? Cam Hayward on his radio show, he basically said, I got a problem with AB right now. I'm paraphrasing, yes. But, it was pretty clear he basically said he quit. He quit on us, and that is not acceptable.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So, can Antonio Brown, it's Le'Veon Bell squared, really. Because, Bell made a promise to show up, but he didn't leave them mid-season or at a crucial point in a game and basically quit on them during the football season. Bell just never showed up. He might have lied to them. He told them things that, led them to believe he was going to show up and didn't show up. But, if he had come into camp, my bet is he would have played. But so this is that kind of drama, but this is different based on what transpired at the Bengals game.
Yeah, and regardless of whether he did or didn't, it's the perception of the team, and I think that's kind of what's getting lost in this entire situation. Again, we won't really know the full details of what actually happened probably until somewhere down the road in the offseason, if it even comes to that point. And I think realistically, you have to look at what the teammates are saying and how they're feeling about it, because they don't know everything, I'm sure, either. The fact that a lot of players say that they felt that he was faking the injury, if that was the case. The fact that there's instances where a lot of players came out after the game was over and they didn't make the playoffs, and they're complaining about the fact that I know Vance McDonald had a quote, Cam had a quote, Vance McDonald had a quote. There was a couple other, can't think of the names off the top of my head, that kind of came out and said that they felt that maybe there was some issues with team chemistry, and I think that was kind of ironic on the heels of John Harbaugh coming out and saying his quote about how their teamwork and having each other's back was a big thing. And for me, I think teamwork a lot of times and having that camaraderie to come together can make the most untalented teams into winners, because of the fact that when you have the guys next to you's back, that's going to be a huge thing. I think you look at the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles had a very talented team last year. There's no questioning that. But especially in the playoffs, when they had absolutely no business going to the Super Bowl and then winning, a lot of that came down to just them rallying around each other and getting to that point. And I think there's no questioning AB's talent at all. He is still the top 5 receiver, top 3 receiver, top 5 player as far as I'm concerned overall, just based on what he can do. At some point, you have to look at the fact, and I agree with Mike Tomlin on this, at some point, the extra baggage and the personality and the talent and the distractions on the talent, the distractions outweigh the talent. I think you've seen this in past with players like Randy Moss, with guys like Terrell Owens, where they're just so over the top fiery and personalities aren't always there that there's no questioning their talent. Those are 2 of the top wide receivers of all time. But at what point, teams got kind of tired of dealing with some of the antics and they kind of just went their separate ways. And I think realistically, at some point that has to be the case, because the Steelers have won nothing as far as I'm concerned. Everyone wants to sit here and take a look at the numbers, and everyone criticizes how Mike Tomlin's a winner, but he doesn't win when it matters. So he gets those participation trophies. Insert whatever Yinzer quote you want. Realistically, the Steelers have found ways to get around issues like this, and I think they could be an even better team without that. And there's no questioning they're a better team without AB. I'm sorry, there's no questioning they're a better team with AB, but I think the one player they can't live without at this point is Ben Roethlisberger. I think they can find ways to get around other things, because Ben is sure won with a lot less. I'm not saying that's the thing, but I mean, it's not like the Steelers have 3 Super Bowls with Antonio Brown, and that's why this is as big of a question. I mean, they've made it to the Super Bowl once when he was a rookie, and he was kind of a non-factor. He was the 4th guy on the depth chart, I believe, or 5th guy on the depth chart at that point in time. Mm-hmm. and then they've made it to one other AFC Championship game in that span. So it's not like we're sitting here saying that the Steelers have all these rings with AB. How can you give that up? There's nowhere else to go. The standard is Super Bowls. At what point do you sit here and say that all this toxicity in the background that's really making the Steelers have a bad image amongst NFL circles? When is that going to get to a point where it has to stop? And I think we're getting to that point. Without even looking at the financial ramifications of it, I think at some point you have to look at the team first rather than the individual, and that's what the Steelers hopefully will do at some point.
What I remember is the Super Bowl against the Cardinals and the Super Bowl in Detroit, and I remember. You remember that they considered themselves a band of brothers, and most teams do, but it was a different feeling. Right? You knew those guys were together as a unit. And guess what? None of this kind of nonsense was exposed. It doesn't mean stuff didn't happen, because I guarantee you stuff happened. But it didn't come out the way it comes out here, and that's because the primary focus was the team, and it wasn't each individual. Hines Ward is a great receiver. In my mind, he's a Hall of Fame receiver, if for nothing else than for his blocking ability as a wideout. But he's not Antonio Brown in talent. Hines Ward had his own unique set of talents and was a great player and receiver. Antonio Brown is a better wide receiver than Hines Ward was. Antoine Randall, he's better than Antoine Randall. I mean, you just think of the guys that they won Super Bowls with. None of them, Santonio Holmes, none of them are as good as AB, as with talent and with the self-made abilities that he has. They just aren't. But the difference was that group of guys and those personalities, they were focused on team first, not me first. And I think that's a huge thing. And that's why, the question really becomes, as I asked it, are we at the breaking point with Antonio Brown? And you never say never, but there's a big part of me that says we might be, and we'll see. There's always a door could be open right now. Antonio Brown has the chance to try and do the right things, come back, settle this amicably within the club, not in public, but within the club. Don't get the Festivus poll back out and go do your airing of grievances at Steelers headquarters. Do not get on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever with James Harrison and start doing a damn interview that's going to essentially trash your team or teammates. Don't do that.
Yeah. I think that's the main thing too, is the fact that, let's say hypothetically nothing did happen and this was all blown out of proportion and nothing is real. The last thing you should want to do is then go and act like a fool on social media, like he was doing with James Harrison, posting the cryptic stuff, having fun with it. And maybe if that's your game, then so be it. But you're not doing anything to help your teammates. You're doing nothing to help the fan perspective of what the current situation is.
Yeah. So, if in fact we're at a point in time where it is time for the Steelers to cut bait with Antonio Brown and say, your time here is done. Thank you for your service. Enjoy your next stop. The question becomes, what can they do, if anything? And to be fair to the person who came up with this, Ian Whetstone put out a group of 7 scenarios that he thinks are the potentially most likely concepts. One is that AB remains a Steeler. Another one is that AB is cut before March 17th. He is cut but designated as a post-June cut. He is cut after March 17th. And then there are 2 trade scenarios. Now, I'm going to discount all of the cut. They're not going to cut AB. They're not going to walk away because they'll get something rather than nothing. I think those 3 scenarios, while they exist, they're out there, and there are actually members of the media who are advocating it is time to just say goodbye and cut your losses. They're not going to do that. You do not cut one of the top 5 players in the league. You just don't do it because someone will bite, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What I think still may be the most likely option, because everything else requires a partner to be involved in it, is that AB stays a Steeler, in which case, nothing really changes. He has a cap hit of $22 million and some change in 2019, $18 million in 2020, $19 million in 2021. They have cash payouts of $15, $11, and $12 million in those 3 years. That's probably what happens. Let's say that up front. That's probably what happens. But probably, 6 months ago would have been 99% what happens. Now probably is 65% that's what happens. The door has been opened, as some people have said, for other options. And so, really, in my mind, the breakdown is this way. If they trade Antonio Brown, they're going to take a cap hit. There's no question about it, right? That's just the way it works. So the real question is, do they decide to trade him before March 17th or after March 17th? And I don't remember what that deadline is all about, but you probably do. So what is that 3/17 deadline?
Yeah, so the start of the league year is, I believe, March 13th, which is when everything is brand new. We look at it as 2019, and then post the 17th, I believe, is whenever I forget what period that's. I don't know if it's free agency or what, but there's a period there at that window where that's kind of like the preferred window, because at the 17th, the Steelers would owe him his kind of reallocated roster bonus of the $2.5 million, which at that point, then they have to pay. At that point, he gets the money up front. They're done, period. So the Steelers lose that money. If you were to look at him in that window from the 13th to the 17th, the kind of 5-day window, the Steelers don't owe him the $2.5 million. They'd be able to trade him easier than they would otherwise. And the cap hit would also be less, because you're looking at the cap hit then being $23 million instead of $21 million, because you then paid him that $2.5 million. So it's kind of the window of grace whenever the league year officially starts compared to whenever, the negotiations kind of start happening with free agents. That's kind of where they look at that window as being the sweet window for the Steelers and opportunity. Gotcha.
So in my mind, the scenario that pans out the best here is that AB is traded before March 17th. They don't have a cash payout. The cap hit is $21.1 million, which is actually a savings over what the cap hit would be if he stays. So I think, you can look at that as a deadline date to a certain extent, because it's their best and most fiscally responsible option to try and do something. The question is, what can they try and do, and who can they try and do it with? So if Antonio Brown is going to be traded, you might, in some senses, you might think, every team in the league is going to line up to get Antonio Brown. He's that good. And I get that mentality, but that's just not the facts. They're not. There are organizations out there that are going to want nothing to do with Antonio Brown. There are organizations out there that have much greater needs than Antonio Brown. And there are organizations out there that would love to have Antonio Brown. There's no question about it. Ray Fittipaldi, he wrote an article about 5 potential trade scenarios, and I think the ones that he highlights are legitimate, but I think that there are more out there. And people are going to start trade him and get, 3 number ones because Khalil Mack got 2 number ones and Amari Cooper got a number 1 pick from the Cowboys. So Antonio Brown is 50 times better than Amari Cooper. He should get 50 number 1 picks. Well, come on. Let's start this by saying, here's what my concern is in trading Antonio Brown. Are you going to get even remote value, right? And even anything close to what you're giving for this trade? And the answer is probably no. But how much can you eke out of anybody? So with that being said, in your mind, what do you think the max they can get from a team is going to be for Antonio Brown?
I think a lot of it will come down to the team individual scenario, and because of that's how small that window would have to be to get a trade done. I think either they would get it or they wouldn't. I think the max value that they realistically could get would be in the ballpark of like a first rounder and maybe even a second. I think realistically, I don't know how many teams would be willing to give that up unless they have the draft capital and like they're in a position right now where they need to go and win. I think realistically, a first and a fourth or a first and a third would be realistic value, or even a second and multiple fourths maybe. I think that would be the realistic value. I know some people might disagree. I just think you have to weigh a lot of things because, some teams might be scared off of all the stories they might hear, and now between March 13th, there might be some kind of off-putting factors that they might not want to give up the house to get a guy at AB's talent, but there definitely would be suitors. I think they should be able to get a first rounder for him, just simply based on looking at some of the other trades that have transpired in recent months and over the last year. So I would say probably the max value would be maybe a first and a future second, or a first and a third would be my guess for max value.
All right, and my feeling is very similar. I think that they can get 2 picks, and they can, depending on where those picks lie, they can maybe get 2 picks in a player.
Yep.
So the team that I keep coming back to because Chucky is insane is the Raiders. The Raiders have 3 number 1 picks. They have 10 picks in the draft coming up. They have stockpiled a huge amount of draft capital. The flip side of this is that while Chucky's insane, Mike Mayock is not. And so, the window for fleecing the Raiders may be over at this point. But nonetheless, when you've got essentially 4 picks in the top 35 picks, you've got the capital to go after an Antonio Brown with a deal that nobody else can match, regardless of player. I'm not sure there's a player on the Raiders I want, to be quite honest. I mean, can you think of anybody off the top of your head that you'd want to try and pick up from the Raiders?
Not that they would be willing to give up, not that I can think of. And realistically, there's no one on that roster right now that really screams, you can make my franchise better type of deal. So
exactly. So if the deal is coming from them, it's picks and picks alone. I didn't take the time to look and see how, whether they've stockpiled picks the way the Browns did for years to come. But, they've got enough that, you could say, I'll give you 25 and 27 for Antonio Brown. And I think that the Steelers, maybe should take that without thinking hard about it. Because that gives you now 3 top, first round picks. And that's a big amount of capital. I think they could do the 4th. They could go and say, look, give me the 4th and a second next year. That's the 4th pick in the draft. When's the last time the Steelers had a top 5 pick in the draft? Terry Bradshaw? I don't remember. You know what I mean? You're talking a long time ago. But I don't know. Like I said, the wild card is Mike Mayock now becoming a part of that management team. I don't know that he's going to be willing to give up those picks for Antonio Brown. What do you think about them trying to be able to get a deal with the Raiders?
I'd like to think Reggie McKenzie would. I'd like to think that Mike Mayock, mainly because I respect him as much as I do, wouldn't be willing to give up that as quickly and as readily as, say, Reggie McKenzie would. And I think really the recent trade interactions, the Martavis Bryant trade and the Ryan Switzer trade should be 2 things fans look at. That they have an open relationship now, and John Gruden has openly been willing to go and make moves, and it's not unknown to people that AB is a well-liked player in the league, and John Gruden likes AB as well. So if he could do some convincing, I think that'd be a realistic trade location, just due to the fact that, one, it's a need because they're still kind of looking for that receiver with an aging Jordy Nelson and Martavis Bryant being out for however long now potentially. And I think having a guy like AB, there should at least be the interest from them. I think they would be one of the teams that almost unquestionably would go and at least put feelers out there.
Yep.
And then realistically, if you get the 2 second picks as well for the Steelers, and you have picks 20, 24, and 27?
Yes.
That's the 2 Raider picks. I mean, that's a decent package, at least for 2 of those, to then move up. And if you see a guy falling that you really like that they might not have had the opportunity to do in years past, they could easily slide up and kind of do what they did for Troy Polamalu and take up and get their guy. And maybe we'll be having this conversation 10 years from now, and they have another Troy Polamalu-esque playmaker on that team that they desperately need. Who knows?
Yep. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 25 and 27. But yeah, still, you're not talking about much of a difference there. I think, that's a very legitimate potential partner. And the other one is another one is the Cardinals. The Cardinals, I think, they don't have the same amount of draft capital, and I can't imagine them giving up the number 1 overall pick for Antonio Brown. But they could maybe package future picks and Patrick Peterson. And, they're both players of similar ages. Patrick Peterson has his own baggage that occurred during the season with, did he request a trade or didn't he request a trade? So that's a possibility. And hey, I don't know that I like this one as much as some others might. I like the idea of Patrick Peterson being a Steeler. I like the idea of having a cornerback of his potential here, but I don't know. I don't know if I feel like that's as good as some of the other potential options might be. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cardinals would have definitely the interest, and especially I think the wild card for them would be having a new coach come in now with the firing of Steve Wilkes. So maybe they get a guy in there who wants to move a guy like Patrick Peterson, since apparently management has been looking to move him, especially with some of the things that had occurred mid-season. I know Steelers fans would go wild, and if the Steelers' window truly is now, having Patrick Peterson and Joe Hayden playing opposite of each other would definitely be an appealing factor. It kind of eliminates the need to necessarily get that one pick you have, because arguably one of the biggest Steelers' needs this offseason is another cornerback to kind of fill that hole opposite of Hayden. So I think realistically that would be a good fit. Especially if Larry Fitzgerald ends up walking free agency. I know he wants to play another year potentially, so if he chooses to not do it in Arizona or they give him another deal, that gives Josh Rose another toy to play with and kind of have him feel it out as he continues to develop his relationship with Christian Kirk and AB and whomever, and maybe get David Johnson back on the ground. So that gives an opportunity for AB to kind of a similar situation he had with Bell, where you have that kind of multifaceted do-it-all running back in the form of David Johnson. He's healthy now. I think that'd be a better situation for AB. That should be more appealing to him. You get a young quarterback, the pieces that are already set in place, and a new coach that might be willing to instill that kind of personality in that player. So I think as much as the draft capital isn't there necessarily, there is the potential for a return piece that wouldn't really hurt the Steelers as much financially as simply just having to let go of AB.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably explore this in much greater depth as the offseason gets going, because gosh knows we're going to need stuff to talk about since the season ended a bit prematurely for what we would have expected. So I do want to reemphasize that in all likelihood we will never know 100% of the truth of what is going on. We will probably get more information, as you said, as the season goes on, but in all likelihood we're never going to know really what happened here. And just from the standpoint of what might we expect to occur going forward, look, I think that the Steelers right now are legitimately willing to listen to trade offers. I believe that. I believe that they are. I don't know that I believe they're shopping Antonio Brown. I don't know that they're going out of their way at this point, but I think that there's at least the chance that is a reality. And I think that the potential for Brown to leave the black and gold and have his time in Pittsburgh done is 50-50 maybe at this point. And that would have not been something anybody would have imagined at the beginning of this season. So if that is in fact the case, we may have some excitement in the next few months. We may not. I still think there's a chance that all of this gets blown over, that they find a way to work things out. But I just don't know. This has a different feel to it than it has in the past, when he has done some things that were more Antonio Brown focused rather than team focused, and they seemed like they were more forgivable than this latest situation. So, Zach, I'm going to put you on the spot here and put your title of professor of football to work. In April, when the draft rolls around, is Antonio Brown a Pittsburgh Steeler?
I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say yeah, because I think the window is so small for them to make a trade happen. Like I said, that's that 13th to 17th window because his bonus becomes in full effect on the 18th, and that's kind of why that date sticks out. They can't make a trade before the 13th because that's the first day of the official league year. So there's kind of that 5-day window, and I don't think the Steelers get it done at that point in time. And really, in my opinion, what's the point in doing it after the draft at that point? Because then, you miss out on the draft capital and you don't know what's going to happen the following year, so that you might as well keep them. So in my opinion, I think there will be a way for this to kind of blow over, but I agree that it's had a different feel to him. And I think it's interesting to me that, Mike Tomlin was a lot more non-committal about AB's future of the team than they were about Martavis Bryant, who you kind of expected at some point was going to be gone. And they were willing to say that, no, we're not shopping him. He's not getting traded. And I don't think the Steelers would admit if they did, or if they were in the process of shopping AB, because they're pretty hush-hush about that. But I don't see a scenario right now reasonably in my head. And, maybe we'll be wrong. I think the Steelers will find a way to do it. And I know a lot of fans will probably be upset about it because, they'll say it's Mike Tomlin just, keeping the same old circus going and blah, 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 whatever. I think there's too many factors that'll play into AB having to be moved. And, maybe if they get a deal that's too good to pass up on, they'll do it. But I think he'll be back in 2019.
So just to be a contrarian, I'm going to say he won't be. Whether I actually believe this or not, look, I think that regardless of the NFL rules, regardless of what you can and can't do, I look at the teams that are not playing anymore, which includes, unfortunately, the Steelers, and the teams that are potential trade partners to make something work for Antonio Brown. And in my heart, I know that regardless of what they're allowed to do, conversations occur. So I don't feel like they're limited to that 4-day window. I think they can have something in place before it happens, and pull the trigger quickly. So I am going to say that I think Antonio Brown is gone, and I think that he will be gone before the 2019 season starts, maybe before the draft. But we'll have to wait and see. And let me also emphasize, that's not necessarily what I want to have happened. Because I think AB is a generational talent. I think AB is, tons of fun to watch. And I really hope they can figure out a way to all cohabitate for another 2 or 3 years. Because at the point when Ben leaves and Marquise Pouncey leaves and the offensive line degenerates, we're going to have a lot of slow years anyway. And at that point, if AB wants to fly the coop, fine. But because he's not going to win anything, and probably he's going to have a hard enough time having a learning quarterback throw to him. So we'll see. We'll see how this all pans out. But it is fun to talk. You know what? I'm going to take that back. This isn't fun to talk about. I don't even want to talk about this. Can't we just have some peace and daggone quiet for a little while?
We're going to talk about the draft. It's draft season in Pittsburgh now, and that seems to be just getting completely put to the wayside because of this entire situation. So I'm with you.
Yeah. All right, Zach. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure. Anything you want to leave the folks with before we sign off?
Yeah, just pretty much the same thing you said. I don't want necessarily. I want this to all. In a perfect world, this would blow over and AB gets to stay Steeler because he's been one of my favorite players for the last 9 years, and I think he does help the team win. And quite frankly, what I've said today has really no implication on the entire scenario. I just think that we don't know what happened, and everything that kind of is going on right now is speculative. And I think it's sit tight. It's going to be a fun ride to the finish until we actually see what goes on. So just enjoy it while you can. If you can, enjoy it at all.
Yeah, it's almost like it's fantasy football in real life. We're dealing with the speculation that exists because it exists, even if we don't really think that's the way it's going to go.
Yep, and it could. Who knows? It could end up being nothing.
Yep. and we'll keep our fingers crossed. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's a Steeler until he retires. Steelers for life, as we all would prefer, I think, although there's some out there that don't. But be that as it may, that's going to wrap it up for us. For those of you who have hung around and listened to us this whole time, we greatly appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, give us a like, a thumbs up. We appreciate you guys listening and commenting, even the ones that we don't agree with. Until next time, my name's Brian, his name's Zach, and as I always like to remind you, it's chaos out there, so be kind.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.